Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today, we'll be discussing how Israel's #1 emergency service has responded to Hamas's rockets and missiles. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's guests all the way from London. They are Daniel Berger, who is the Chief Executive of Magen David Adom, and Barbara Dingle of Christian Friends of Magen David Adom, and also a board member of MDA. Daniel, warm welcome to the programme. Good to have you back, especially as you've had a week in Israel to kind of assess the work of Magen David Adom in responding to what can only be described as one of the worst months in Israel's history in terms of the Mount Meron crisis, together with the violent demonstrations we saw in Jerusalem, the Israeli Arabs rioting and setting like synagogues and shops and cars and residential areas, also in Akko, and then of course the 4,000 Hamas rockets that fell over southern and central Israel over 11 days. But before we outline your fact-finding mission to Israel, just describe for us the work that you are doing with Magen David Adom to save lives in Israel.
Well, firstly, thank you for having me back.
Always a pleasure.
Absolutely, always a pleasure to be here. Yeah, it was a very interesting trip. But to answer your question, we are continuing to put emergency medical supplies on the ground to equip Israel's National Medical Emergency Service. And thanks to the generosity of all of our communities, when all of this happened with Guardians of the Wall, we said, what can we do quickly? How can we make an impact? And we knew there was some ambulances in Israel that hadn't yet been assigned. So I spoke to our ambulance supplier and I said, we'll take 2. We'll put them on the road immediately. And I was able to see them last week. And as the money came in and as the generosity of our donors continued, we actually dedicated 3 MICUs, mobile intensive care units, worth over £200,000, thanks to our communities.
Amazing. And Barbara, you're now a board member of Magen David Adom, so congratulations on that point. And also share with us the work that you are doing through Christian Friends of Magen David Adom to raise support for this vital ambulance service in Israel.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. It's always a joy to come and talk about how Christians are contributing to saving lives in Israel. This is interesting because Christian Friends of MDA was actually founded during the 2006 Second Lebanon War. So it was founded during a similar operation to we've just been through. And the idea then was to raise funds for 1 ambulance to not just support Israel with our prayers, but in a very practical way. And little did we know in those 15, 16 years, we've raised funds by the help of the wonderful Christians in this country for 9 ambulances,
wow,
2 blood mobiles, the vehicles that go around collecting blood, 4 medicycles, and an emergency room in Kiryat Shmona, right up in the north. And today we continue to do this. Now we're raising funds for the National Blood and Logistics Centre, which is being built.
Excellent. So let's remind ourselves of how Christian Friends of Magen David Adom are helping Israel through the work of Magen David Adom.
Getting to the scene of a terror attack quickly is critical to save lives. That's why Jesus Ministries donated 3 new ambulances to Israel's first responders, Magen David Adom.
And this is a practical way of showing support?
That I believe is, because in my little survey that I did, in one way we can help the poor is by the need for blood donation and medical supplies.
The ambulances will make a difference beyond fighting terrorism.
Each one of these vehicles is providing services to hundreds and thousands of people every year. And by that we can deliver babies safely en route to the hospitals. We can resuscitate elderly people. We can support people with disabilities and then evacuate them under very good medical conditions and supervision to the hospitals.
The gifts demonstrate the growing relationship between Christians and Jews.
The ambulances are an important part of showing to the Israeli people the Christian support and love for Israel. This is one of the most important aspects of the ambulances. It shows to the Israeli people who often feel very alone that we are not alone, that God has brought these Christian people to support us and to lift us up. And this does that.
We're an isolated people. We're people, we're vilified, we're castigated, we're ostracized in so many corners of the earth. At the same time, once you can lift the manhole of the secret chambers, there are millions and millions that are supportive and love the Jewish people. Our job is to open those doors, to prize them open, to keep them open, and to make sure that the Jewish-Christian relationship is a continuing, beautiful, beautiful flower that blossoms and blooms for all the whole wide world to see.
One ambulance driver wanted to pass along a message to the Christians.
He said, tell them that each time I go out on a call, I feel that all of them are with me. And I have the energy to save a person's life and to provide health and safety to the people that I'm called to serve.
In the end times, Israel is going to be left all alone, as we read from the Holy Scriptures. And the only people who are going to stand with them, as it was in the past, will be the Christians.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And thanks to Chris Mitchell for that excellent CBN report there, focusing on the work of Magen David Adom. Daniel, as I said earlier in the kind of intro, May 2021 has been a very, very tough month for Israel. And Israel also faced its worst natural calamity at Mount Meron. I think over 45 men and boys died in that stampede, together with over 150 injured. And of course, MDA was on the scene. So how did Israel respond to this crisis before it even hit the Hamas rockets and missile crisis that Israel faced only 2 weeks later?
It was horrendous. I mean, reflecting on what's happened, as you say, in May, just an horrendous month. And I remember we woke up in the middle of the night to calls coming in. We had press calls. GMTV was the first call that woke the office up, actually, at 4 a.m. calling, and we knew nothing about it at this point. And as we got into finding out what was going on, I think part of the tragedy was at any mass planned event, there are teams of MDA crews on the ground, a bit like St. John's Ambulance would here, in case someone slips, breaks an arm, needs some medical care. And normally in events like this, it's the youth volunteers and the younger volunteers that are manning the ambulances. And then as the tragedy unfolded, what you actually saw were youth and kids, sadly, horrifically trampling over bodies, saving lives of people younger than them and the same age as them. It was the most horrendous situation. And then, of course, as the gravity came in and they were able to get the vehicles there, 114 vehicles, of which a third of them were British, were called to the scene to help. And it was just awful on all senses.
So we got some B-roll to actually show of that tragedy that took place at Mount Meron. Barbara, I suppose for our viewers watching this, and we got some video footage here that really does show the kind of chaos that took place at Mount Meron. But I suppose for our British viewers here, we can only describe something similar, what happened in Hillsborough, tragedy of '89, where all those people became crushed trying to get down a narrow alleyway and couldn't escape. And of course, then there was that urgent need for blood. Why is blood supply so essential when we see a kind of national disaster as we saw at Mount Meron?
Well, like all countries, Israel has a constant need for blood. All countries do. Whenever they're accidents, whether it be road accidents, or sometimes people have operations that they need extra blood. But when there's a catastrophe like this, there's a great need for blood. And of course, during COVID, it's been more difficult for people to get out and donate blood, as there are a number of components to blood, as you'll know: red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma and platelets. Platelets only have a short shelf life of about 5 days. So there's always a constant need for fresh blood supplies.
And Daniel, as we're talking that May was a very, very tough month for Israel. I mean, sadly, it seems that Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza pretty much overshadowed the events that led up to it. And that was all the kind of violent demonstrations and riots we saw up on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. We see that this attacks on Jewish people instigated by TikTok, that became known as the TikTok Intifada. Can you share with us how difficult it was for MDA staff before Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza?
Well, they'd already come out of a very raw trauma in the north. And I was talking to MDA a few days before this kicked off and saying, how can we in the UK help? What can we do? Because suddenly you're realizing that actually the psychological counseling, people's mental health and well-being, which has become such a buzzword here, particularly during lockdown, but it was such a significant part of what the volunteers and the staff were going through in the north. And then as we were talking about how we can help, everything kicked off on Yom Yerushalayim and of course escalated from there. And the staff worked in some of the toughest conditions. I remember on my visit last week, I was in the Ashdod station. The last time I was there was actually during the 2014 Protective Edge, which I was there during the middle of the rockets coming over. So I remember it very well. And I was talking to some of the staff in the call center, and they were talking about working 16-hour shifts. They were talking about how there was this family environment. And actually, by being in the station, they weren't alone. They weren't going home. And one of the girls I was talking to said she lives in an old apartment where they're on the 3rd floor, and there's a public bomb shelter. And in that area, you've got 15 seconds to get to a bomb shelter. So she couldn't work out, at what point do you shower and how do you get out? And it was so many simple things that they're factoring in. And that's before getting to the work and doing the day job.
And Barbara, it's tough enough being a national emergency service that MDA provides as well, particularly with the very professional and very well-trained paramedics. But to actually do it under rocket fire is something else. So can you describe for us how courageous these paramedics are in Israel and what they have to endure, unlike any other national ambulance service?
Yep. Well, as you know, there were over 4,000 rockets fired by terrorists into Israel, and despicably, some of these rockets actually landed on ambulances. The one ambulance was almost destroyed. Unbelievable. And these paramedics, they don't quite know what situation they're going into. They arrive at a scene. They don't know whether there's going to be another rocket. But the paramount is to save lives, to find the injured, to give them treatment, whoever the injured are.
And Daniel, I mean, it was a very, if we take the kind of maybe a couple of days before the 10th of May, a very tense time in Israel. I mean, we discussed how MDA had to deal with the Mount Meron tragedy, combined with all the kind of riots up on the Temple Mount and in Jerusalem. And then find out that Israel then had to deal with over 1,000 Hamas rockets fired in one single day. And also, which was a new element that Israel hadn't seen since the Second Intifada in 2000, and that was Israeli Arabs looting and rioting, burning down synagogues, setting light to cars and residential areas, including shops as well. How did MDA respond to this? Because this was something that no one really expected.
This was really tough, and I think it was tough not just for MDA, but the shock that almost there was a civil war. This was neighbor on neighbor, and there were situations where MDA ambulances were being looted, smashed. We've got videos of these ambulances being trashed on the ways to calls, and thankfully, even the International Committee of the Red Cross came out and said this is a disgrace, this is abhorrent, this is against the Geneva Convention. These are protected vehicles, these are life-saving, and it should be the same on both sides, whether that's a Palestinian Red Crescent or an MDA ambulance. You do not attack these vehicles. So there was the psychological trauma and the physical trauma of the staff and the crew being dragged out of their vehicles. Shocking. Really shocking. And I think for me, it was a deeply upsetting. This was the most upsetting part of the trip, actually, because we know the rockets at some point were going to come over. That wasn't really a surprise. We knew that was going to happen, and we knew they were going to test the Iron Dome defense system by sending so many over. But when you see friends fighting in the streets, and by the way, the religious Jews were equally as bad. It was very much a two-sided attack. It's just disgraceful on all levels.
And can you also expand upon that more? Because many of the paramedics who serve and work for MDA, or many of them come from Christian or Arab Muslim backgrounds, as well as Jewish paramedics. So it very much represents all of Israel, and is a very kind of multicultural organisation. So share with us the impact this had maybe on some of your Arab drivers as well, that were driving the ambulances and seeing that their own citizens were turning against their Jewish citizens in scenes that we haven't actually seen in Israel before.
Yeah, I mean, exactly as you said, people were scared to come out, and just as much as I was due to go down, for example, to Rahat, and people are saying, don't go to Rahat at the moment, it's not safe. And so it was with deep upset that I couldn't get down to see one of our own projects. But the final part of the trip for me, I had the privilege, and I mean privilege, of doing a few hours on a shift in Tel Aviv with Khatib, who's an Israeli Arab, and also Dror, who's an Olim, a young Olim. Both of them are trainers, both of them train volunteers and work side by side, and they took me out on a shift. And it was so reassuring to see that there is still coexistence, and MDA flies that amazing flag for everything that's still great about Israel on all levels. And having been really deeply upset by what I saw in this quasi-civil war, to spend time with Khatib and Dror was a real privilege.
Amazing. And Barbara, I mean, sometimes when we see our kind of mainstream media portrayal of this conflict, knowing that Hamas is a genocidal terrorist organisation that's committed to Israel's destruction, and also B, that they have fired over 4,000 rockets and missiles into central and southern Israel, targeting Tel Aviv as well as Jerusalem as well. And our mainstream media don't seem to comprehend that these rockets do any harm. And of course, we have this whole discussion about proportionality, the number of Israelis died compared to those Palestinians who've died in the conflict. But how real is it for not only Israel to respond to these rockets and missiles, but also for MDA to be on the scene and to treat those that are injured, and also knowing that our own ambulance crew actually could have come under the fire of Hamas's rockets?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, there's no equivalence. Hamas is a terrorist organisation whose charter calls for the destruction of the State of Israel and the killing of Jewish people. They want to kill and destroy, whereas Israel and Jewish people save lives. The sanctity of life is important. So Israel does all it can to protect not only its own citizens, but when it tries to take out terrorist entities, rocket launchers, etc. in Gaza, they try to do so with precision so that the civilian population in Gaza are also protected. Whereas these rockets coming from them are indiscriminate, killing people, 4,000 rockets, as we know.
And Daniel, share with us how a paramedic belonging to MDA would respond to some of these rockets and missiles that particularly fell on southern Israel, say Ashdod or Ashkelon, and how they then psychologically prepare themselves to going almost into a war zone, knowing that whilst all the other Israelis are running to bunkers to get protection, they are having almost to go into a war zone and could actually get hit by these rockets themselves. And of course also the very specialised professional equipment that the ambulances are kitted out.
So psychologically, I don't know how anyone prepares themselves. I guess a call comes in, the adrenaline takes over, and they know that ultimately they are there to save a life. No question whose, when, where, or what. And they go out on a call. The vehicles are not armoured. They're regular vehicles, a typical General Motors ambulance like you see in all the videotape you've shown. The one exception to our ambulances, as to most countries around the world, is they carry Kevlar vests and bulletproof helmets. Typically 3 sets, the driver, the EMT or the paramedic, and 1 for the patient. And you're right, there's been situations, I was talking to a paramedic, and they said on one occasion they were driving to hospital when the sirens went off and they were performing CPR on the patient. And at that point, all you can do is get out the vehicle, get to the side of the road, take the patient out of the vehicle, continue CPR whilst putting them in a bulletproof helmet and a Kevlar vest, all within a few seconds.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? That Israel has to go through this. And Barbara, as well, we know that as Christians we're called to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and to actually know that Christian Friends of Magen David Adom partner with MDA. How much of a difference do you think that the prayers of Christians praying for Israel, particularly during this last conflict, has been a very, very difficult and trying time for Israel?
I have no doubt our prayers make a big difference. And the Bible says to us, comfort, comfort my people. So what a privilege to be able to do so, first of all, with our prayers, but secondly, by supporting MDA. And it's not just that we are saving lives, but all these ambulances that we have given by the generosity of British Christians, they all say on the outside, donated by Christian Friends of MDA UK. So when Israelis are stuck in the traffic and they see an ambulance next door saying donated by Christian Friends, or when an ambulance turns up at somebody's home if they've been injured or had a heart attack and it says donated by Christian Friends, that is saying to Israel and to the Jewish people, you are not alone. So often Israel thinks they're alone. So often the Jewish people feel that they are alone. So we want to say, we are Christians, we are standing with you.
And Daniel, as of this recording, last week you had the fantastic opportunity of going to Israel after the aftermath of this conflict to go on a kind of fact-finding mission, as it were, to see the work of MDA under fire and see the situation for yourself. What was your assessment of what Israel's like and what's the general atmosphere and mood? Because I know that friends who are wanting to go to Israel at this time are finding it really difficult to get visas. So you're one of the blessed few that's able to go, despite Israel being on the green passport list.
So, yeah, once I got through the painful process of being admitted and going through numerous PCRs and blood tests, I achieved my green COVID status. And that was a proud moment in the first place. And without politically grandstanding over whether we should or shouldn't have a vaccine passport here, you asked me about the mood. Now, I was staying in Tel Aviv and can't get into restaurants for love nor money. People are partying in the streets. Normality has returned on several levels, whether that be the COVID vaccine passport and restaurants being very non-discriminatory. You want to come in, you show your passport. Very discriminatory, I should say. You want to come in, you show your passport. Simple as that, or you eat outside. So firstly, it's the inability to get into the good restaurants and the bars, which was a real pleasure to see from an economical point of view, and slowly tourism will ramp up. And then on top of that, actually, it was just seeing people relaxing again after these horrendous times they've been through. The sirens were ringing out in Tel Aviv.
And it's extraordinary. And also you had the opportunity to go to Ashdod, which is one of those towns that's very close to the Gaza Strip. And you can actually talk through this video where you are outside this house that was actually bombed by one of the Hamas's rockets or missiles. Can you just talk us through where you are and what you're seeing, Daniel?
I'm in Ashdod here. What you can't see yet, this is a semi-detached house. The house to the left of the screen is intact, thankfully. The rocket came through directly above where my head is, through that upper window, through the roof. But directly in front of me, probably no more than 15 meters away, is a huge primary school. And if they hadn't gone to safety, the consequences could have been just horrific. You can now see as we move into the building, the devastation from one rocket. It was a large rocket. You'll see the damage as we come in. It was just utter devastation. everything, and they just left everything. There's food out, there's drinks. That's the rocket. It came through both floors, completely obliterated the stairs. House was just totally trashed. There's food out from where they were cooking, pans. It was as if they just left and ran and never came back.
I'm so pleased you actually provided this footage that we're seeing now, but sadly we didn't see any of this on our mainstream media. No one covered the damage of these Hamas rockets and missiles, and if it wasn't for Israel's Iron Dome, then I think MDA would have a much bigger task on their hands in the fact that Israel would be dealing with thousands of casualties, not only a few.
You're right. And the way I look at it is there's a trade-off. Iron Dome saves lives, there's no doubt. The fatalities are massively reduced. So the question is, if the fatalities, or rather, if the fatalities were greater, there would be a better balance between what's going on in Gaza and what's going on in Israel. But actually, Israel, understandably, just wants to save lives. And if that creates a media bias and an imbalance, then frankly, they don't care. They're all about the saving of lives.
And Barbara, why do you think that our mainstream media is actually not showing the videos that Daniel took, for example, to show supporters of MDA how lethal and deadly these Hamas rockets are?
Well, one thing, our mainstream media doesn't seem to say that when journalists report from Gaza, they are actually doing so under the control of Hamas, and Hamas regulates what the media says, what journalists say, and if journalists say things that Hamas don't like, they have problems. So for their own safety, they're muzzled. I think, it would be good for the media to say, reporting under the control of Hamas authorities.
Yeah, but those are the journalists that are based in Israel, in Gaza, but those that are actually based in Israel, we don't see that kind of reporting or show the damage done, which gives a distorted view of the conflict.
Yeah.
And what's the morale like of MDA staff during this conflict? Because, dealing with constant pressure and stress as it is anyway, let alone having to respond to 4,000 rockets and missiles being fired at you.
I think it's one of pride. It is horrific what they have to go through. There's no doubt, but they're proud. As I said before, the girl I was talking to was proud to be a part of a family. They're proud to represent the organisation. I was out with the Director General whilst I was there, and we went out for some lunch in a restaurant in Tel Aviv, and everyone was coming up to him, hugging him, saying, Toda Rabbah, thank you for all that you do. And I think that just replicates what's going on through Israeli society.
No, absolutely. And we showed a little bit of video there of a British Jewish person that has made Aliyah to Israel. We know that during times of crisis, that it's not only the Jewish community that responds to these crises, but also the Christian communities have responded as well. What has been the response to Operation Guardian Walls?
So, as I said earlier, we have been extremely fortunate that thanks to the generosity of our communities, and I mean that in plural, right the way around the country, and our Christian communities, we've put these 3 mobile intensive care units on the road. I saw them last week in Ashdod. We've dedicated them, and they will literally be going on the road within the next week. And that impact, the ability to do that, and the lives those will save thanks to our communities here, is just wonderful, really wonderful.
Yeah. And how was Christian Friends of Magen David Adom responded to this crisis, Barbara?
We're very touched by the response we have had. Many people have sent in donations. We've just completed another blood mobile on the roads, which goes around collecting blood. And our appeal for the new blood centre is going extremely well.
Excellent.
And I think you're underselling just how well, actually. Not only is the support coming in thick and fast, Christian Friends of Magen David Adom UK is purchasing this beautiful mezuzah that's going to be adorning the front door. The very first entrance into the $120 million project will be seen as a Christian Friends donation. That's amazing in itself.
And we're also providing funds for the escalator, which will be on all 5 floors of the new centre, 3 underground to protect the blood centre from attack, also from earthquakes and such things.
Yeah.
Standing on them last week. It was amazing to see.
Wonderful.
In fact, the blood centre is phenomenal, and when we see things like Guardians of the Wall, it reminds us why we need to get the blood protected and underground.
No, absolutely. And can you share why, with your National Blood Centre, why you needed a big, brand new national centre and why it had to be built underground to actually protect Israel's crucial blood supply from any attack from Hamas or Hezbollah or Palestinian Islamic Jihad rockets and missiles?
Yeah, I think the underground part's easy. We've seen that, and we're still very conscious of the rockets that are pointing down from the north, from Lebanon. That's the big, scary threat. So putting this underground is an absolute essential. The current facility in Tel HaShomer is not built to the current earthquake standards, and Israel actually fears an earthquake as much as a terror attack. And the last thing they want is that building collapsing because of an earthquake. And then finally, it's no longer fit for purpose for the size of the population of Israel. It was built in the 80s, where it was a much smaller population than it is now. So this is future-proofing Israel's blood supplies.
And how is the development going of the National Blood Centre? I mean, when will it be kind of fully operational?
Depends who you ask, but if I ask Moshe Noyovich, their project manager who took me around the other day, November. They plan to hand over the keys to MDA in November. And I haven't been there since last March 2020, and the difference is no longer a building site. Inside, it's almost complete. Everything underground is done. It's phenomenal. I mean, it really is breathtaking. I can't wait for your readers, your supporters, come and see this for themselves.
And it did take you half the day to walk around the new complex.
I walked 12,000 steps in 3 hours. I got my exercise in that day.
I can
And
imagine.
a figure for you, Israel currently needs about 270,000 units of blood a year, and it's estimated by 2030 that will have gone up to about 500,000 units of blood.
Wow. I went on to the MDA UK website, and it reports on the blood supplies here have been increased through to hospitals and throughout Israel by over 650 units of blood, and blood components have been provided for. So during this crisis, how urgent was it that Israelis actually gave blood to boost Israel's blood supplies during this?
Of course, it's vital. I mean, again, we know from the Bible, life is in the blood, and blood is often required, and it's required quickly. And both the current centre and the new one, they have a lot of biological tests for checking. It's first of all, it's free from any illness, for any disease, and the right sort of blood, the right group, and what's needed, whether it's plasma with antibodies or platelets, red blood, it's all sorted out in this blood centre and quickly distributed around the country to where it's needed, to particular hospitals or elsewhere.
And also, Daniel, as an organisation, and the way that Israel is growing now and is really having tremendous economic success with Israel's startup nation, and with all this foreign investment in Israel's high tech as well, what role does MDA UK now play, knowing that Israel is very economically self-sufficient? I know this is a kind of problem for your organisation in terms of, in Israel's past, it was all about making sure there were enough ambulances, enough paramedics were equipped. But now Israel's growing economically so well, and probably doing better than most European countries, and has certainly come out of this COVID-19 crisis as a major player and a powerful nation in the world. How are you responding to that challenge?
It's a great question, and it is a challenge. I see it as an opportunity, not a problem, actually, because the donor demographic is changing for all the reasons you've just said. GDP per capita in Israel is greater than the UK's. Look, let's face it, MDA can run its ambulance service. What it can't do is put the amazing capital on the road. It can't buy state-of-the-art ambulances. It doesn't have its own funds to build a $120 million blood centre. We could sit here and debate for hours about whether the government should fund it, whether Israeli society should fund it, but the fact is we saw during Meron, we saw during Guardians of the Wall, what an amazing organisation it needs, and it is. And Israelis volunteer. Don't forget, 90% of the workforce is voluntary. And that's a big part of it. However, when you now throw that back at the UK and other diasporas and say, why should I give my money to MDA? Why should I support the state of Israel? Well, the answer is simple. Firstly, you are saving lives in Israel and beyond its borders. And secondly, as the new Middle East evolves and the Abrahamic Accords are coming online, and the ability to support a flag-flying advocate of everything that's amazing about Israel suddenly creates a very, very different MDA and a very different proposition for our supporters. And that, in my opinion, is the key to attracting the next generation of MDA supporters.
And Daniel, I want to expand upon this because I know I had a conversation with you maybe a couple of months ago on this one, and you were discussing particularly how, because of the Abraham Accords, that openings are happening for MDA in Bahrain and also in the United Arab Emirates. Can you share with us how that is having an impact on MDA, the cooperation between Israel and the Gulf states?
So we met with on Zoom with the Deputy Emirati Ambassador to the UK, and the first thing she told us was with pride how the UAE spends 1% of GDP on humanitarian support and aid. And so immediately we're seeing that there is a synergy between our work, their work, Israel's, what we're doing about saving lives around the world. They're very keen to develop relations with Israel. They're very keen to develop relations with ourselves, as are the Bahrainis. And I'm hoping in 2 weeks' time to be back out in Israel with a very exciting group. We're taking some Bahraini and Emirati social media influencers to Israel on a visit, a fact-finding visit on an event that they're calling Finding Abraham. And I'm really excited by the opportunities. It's a really exciting time to be part of MDA UK at the moment.
Excellent. And Barbara, I mean, I suppose one thing that attracts so many of our Christian viewers watching this programme to the work of Christian Friends of Magen David Adom is because it's tangible, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You know, by donating and supporting the work of Christian Friends of Magen David Adom, it literally is kind of helping save lives, and they can see that, particularly when the ambulances are dedicated. And I did a programme a couple of weeks ago with Alistair Scott, who's the UK Director for Vision for Israel, and we show these videos of how Vision for Israel have actually dedicated an ambulance and some more paramedics. Yes. So it's something that Israelis can see, but it's also something very, very tangible. And is that why Christian Friends of Magen David Adom has gained so much support over the years?
I believe so, yes. I mean, we love it because it saves lives, but it's also, as I've just said, it's a witness to the people of Israel. Another organisation I'm involved with, Christine Darg's Exploits Ministry, has just given what's commonly known as a mule. It's a little tractor to the old city of Jerusalem, and it's an MDA vehicle for transporting any injured. You know the old city, There are a lot of narrow pathways. Tourist residents often have accidents. They might fall over, break their ankle, and this little mule can find them and take them to one of the gates of the old city where an ambulance will be waiting for them. It can even go up the steps at somewhere like Damascus Gate. It's a sweet little vehicle. So what a witness to all the residents of the old city, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Arab, whether they're tourists, to see this little mule that also refers to Christian friends.
Excellent. And you've got a little tin in front of you.
Yes.
Can you explain that to our viewers? It's very much like the Jewish National Fund, where they used to have a tin to raise money for planting of trees in Israel.
This tin says, faith without works is dead, a quotation, as you know, from James. It's a little collection tin for putting coins in, whether anyone would like one for their homes, their churches. Please get in touch. We'll happily send you one. And this year is MDA's 90th birthday. It predates the State of Israel. So our groups around the country are having little tea parties. We're very grateful to all our Christian supporters, however they have helped MDA, whether it's by donations, whether it's by publicity, whether it's by fundraising, following us on social media. It all helps, and it all helps to say to the people of Israel, you're not alone, we're standing with you.
Amazing, amazing. And Daniel, I suppose the other aspect we have to look at this, and maybe this is the kind of darker side of this conflict that Israel faced against Hamas. Not only was Israel had to endure over 4,000 rockets and missiles fired at southern and central Israel, but the way that this conflict has now been exported around the world in terms of a rise of kind of global anti-Semitism and seeing those what I can only describe as absolutely shocking pro-Palestinian rallies that took place in London. We also saw that parade of vehicles with the Palestinian flags going around North London or to the Jewish areas, shouting obscenities and abuse. The climate is changing, isn't it, in terms of the rise of Jew hatred that we've seen from Israel's defensive war against Hamas?
It's definitely a seed change. There's been some. I mean, let's face it, these 4 that were arrested, I don't even know if they were Palestinians, but they were arrested. They've been dealt with, thankfully. So Keir Starmer, Boris Johnson, and everyone else came out and said there is no place for blatant inciting a riot, the threats, what they said. We can have political differences. We can have intelligent discourse and say we might not agree with Bibi's agenda. Plenty of people don't agree with Bibi's agenda, let's face it. But there is no place for the anti-Semitism and the incitement of riot. And I still feel very lucky that we live in a liberal society here. I personally, thank goodness, touch wood, have not had any anti-Semitism thrown at me. And we have this debate with our friends in Israel the whole time because they're seeing these events. They're seeing some of these sort of more right-wing Jewish groups set up on Facebook. And I think there is a polarization, definitely. I don't think it's quite as bad as we're seeing. However, when kids are being threatened and we're questioning, when my children who go to a Jewish school and on their blazer they have Hebrew writing, and my question to the school is, right, when they're going out on outings now, do they just wear PKit? Do they wear plain hoodies, right? Because that is a threat, and that's something that I feel very sad that we have to question.
And Barbara, it's almost, I mean, you kind of think it was inevitable, really, that after Israel's war against Hamas in Gaza 2014, that Israel had to send in ground troops for that almost 5-week offensive, that led to a huge spike in anti-Semitism. And considering in the last couple of years, without Israel being involved in any military action against any Palestinian terrorist organizations, that the annual rate of anti-Semitism has escalated. And of course now the Community Security Trust say that really they've seen almost a 5-fold increase in Jew hatred and Jewish attacks after Israel's war against Hamas. Doesn't that make it even more imperative that this is a demonstration of how Christians can show their love to Israel and the Jewish people through CFMDA?
Absolutely. I mean, these people in the cars that were going around the Jewish areas of North London, I actually encountered them. It wasn't just in North London. They went right through the middle of central London near Parliament. I saw them in Victoria Street. I was crossing a road. I don't know who the people were in the cars, but they were wearing sort of Arab headdress. And they looked at me, they leered at me. It was horrible. So yes, we really do, as the Christian community, we really need to stand up with our Jewish friends. Say they're not alone, we're standing with them. We need to write to our MPs. We need to join campaigns. Do all we can.
Absolutely. And what role can Christians play, Daniel, not only in supporting the work of MDA, but also making a stand against Jew hatred? Because we know that when the Jewish people are attacked, this is a warning sign that our society itself is in danger, if we learn anything from history.
I agree with you. I think it's something we need to be very careful of. There is no place for racism of any sort in a Western democracy. There are numerous groups people can get involved with. Please get involved with us. We can put you in touch with the right groups. Barbara knows people to get in touch with. We know there are numerous groups. There are rallies. There's everything from the ZF through to Christian Friends for Israel. There are groups. There's people who can get involved and do things and make that difference. Really make a difference to help stand by everyone, all of the people of Israel.
And as you know, it's often said that Jewish people are like the canary down the coal mine. They are the first to warn of a change for the worst in society. Yeah. It might start with the Jews, it doesn't end with Jewish people.
Very true, very true. And our politicians need to take note of that because our society is in peril. And Daniel, when we look at also internationally as well, and it's amazing how quickly things can change, because only a few months ago, maybe at the beginning of the year, we were looking at Israel's remarkable success in kind of vaccinating its virtually entire population, being one of the first countries to virtually almost stamp out COVID-19. And Israel was on the green passport list for British tourists to visit the country this summer. And now we see the situation where Israel's had to respond to, almost, as you said earlier, virtually almost a civil war that's unprecedented from the rioting and the riots caused by Israeli Arabs, combined with all the violence and destruction we saw up in the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and then to contend with these Hamas rockets and missiles. How does MDA play a role when knowing that Israel is facing kind of more international isolation diplomatically?
MDA is about saving lives. It is the Israeli Red Cross. It's as straightforward as that. They cut through all of the politics. They cut through any disagreements or disputes with countries where there's no diplomatic ties. They save lives, and that may be the terrorist lives first. You know, you have family who are in the medical world. You know that it's about taking an oath and saving the life of whoever needs saving first. And MDA are non-discriminatory, and they're just there on the ground saving lives. And what we can do is help. We can support. We can make that difference between having a good service and having an extraordinary service.
Which brings me on to a really interesting point I made on my notes here. This was from an article in the Times of Israel saying that a relative of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh has been hospitalized in Israel for over a month, including during the recent fighting between the Israeli military and the Gaza-run terror group. This was according to Channel 4 News, said that Haniyeh's 17-year-old niece was being treated at the medical center in Tel Aviv and had undergone bone marrow transplant. And the Walla News site reported that the girl is 6 years old. What does this tell us about Israelis and about the Jewish people? The fact that their enemies are firing rockets and missiles, and yet Israel is actually treating one of the relatives of one of the leaders of Hamas in one of the same hospitals that Hamas could actually be targeting with his own rockets. Crazy world.
It is. It shows the compassion of the Israeli heart, and it shows the importance of the sanctity of life to the Jewish people. Life is sacred. Life is a gift from God, whoever that life is. So we often read, I mean, sadly, in the recent riots, conflict in Israel, a Jewish person died and gave their kidneys to an Arab person. One of the beautiful things about MDA is the cohesion it brings between the different groups. You often have a Jewish person and an Arab person saving lives together in an ambulance, part of the same team. So it's very special, very beautiful to see the life-saving work amongst all the communities and treating everyone, no matter who they are.
And Daniel, I mean, I don't know what other nation other than Israel would actually give urgent medical treatment to a relative of one of the Hamas leaders, and actually with all expense going to the Israeli taxpayer, despite the fact that the one of the leaders of Hamas is responsible for firing these rockets and missiles to cause as much devastation and destruction and death as possible. And yet here, Israel's treating one of the Hamas's relatives in one of the hospitals in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, look, it comes back down to what Barbara said. It's compassion. You could say the same. I know Colonel Kemp did something for Prague University the other week, and he talked about the IDF being the most moralistic army in the world. What other army phones up its enemies and says, get out, we're about to drop bombs on you, and drops those knock bombs that come down with leaflets? So it's the same principle applied. It is about compassion, and it is about treating the individual in that situation.
And Barbara, as Christians, how can we respond to helping Israel by getting involved in the work of Christian Friends of Magen David Adom? And we're hoping that we can get back to having events and back to having conferences. For anyone watching, how can they get involved in the work?
Yeah. Well, please get in touch with us. There are lots of opportunities to get involved. As I said, it's our 90th birthday year, so there are going to be lots of events around the country. We are represented by our Christian Friends of MDA committee all around. We have people in the north, Alan Chester in Liverpool, Alan Ferguson in Jersey and the Channel Islands. Mark Madeley, our president, is in Weston-super-Mare. Helen and Patrick Lenine in Kent. I'm in central London. If anyone else would like to start a local group, that would be great.
And how can they get in touch with you?
I think you've got the web link on your screen. or please get in touch with Revelation TV, who will forward on any connections.
Absolutely. And Daniel, thankfully that we're seeing this ceasefire in place as we're recording, and that peace and calm has now been restored to Israel after a month of really pretty much unprecedented violence we've seen in Israel. So in the closing minutes of the programme, how can our viewers get behind and support the work of MDA in saving lives in Israel?
So, as Barbara said, please support us. The website's there, www.mdauk.org. Your support at any level can make a difference. You can make a donation and it will go to saving lives in Israel. You can also help us host an event, bring people to your home. We can send you information, share the work of MDA, because the best way of learning more about MDA is to spread the love of the organisation.
Absolutely. And Barbara, what response have you seen from Christians who have actually got involved in the work of CFA MDA in terms of helping Israel and Israel's National Emergency Service?
I think everyone who has got involved has just really been struck at what an amazing organisation it is. And people have a real love for MDA. It really is a wonderful family. Brings people together. It's great opportunities in Israel and beyond. MDA doesn't just work in Israel, but as Daniel has referred to, it often is the first on the scene of disasters elsewhere. It has great expertise, both with blood and other medical advances. And also, we have a lot of fun in Christian Friends of MDA. We have a lot of fun as we fundraise, as we tell people about the work of MDA. So do get involved.
And you're right, it's a family. It is a family. And my other offer is come do a shift on an ambulance. When normality returns, I want you, Simon, out there leading the charge and your supporters on a shift.
Absolutely. I've seen that quite a lot mentioned in a lot of the videos, a lot of those paramedics offering anyone really that's in Israel to have an opportunity to see the work of MDA, to actually go on an ambulance shift. I mean, how easy is it to have someone participate in on a shift in an ambulance in Israel?
So easy.
Yeah.
All you have to do is be able-bodied. Be in touch with us. You've got the web address. Drop us a line. Fill in the message contact form. We can make it happen. It is the most amazing way of seeing real Israel, because there, 101 gets called and you're seeing real Israel. You have no idea where the next call is taking you.
And also, what's great, I've done a couple of shifts, is in between calls out, the staff, the people on the ambulance will say, "Why are you doing this? You're a Christian." And what a great opportunity to share that we're here. We love Israel.
Excellent. So Barbara and Daniel, thank you so much for being my guests on today's Middle East Report, and kol hakavod to the amazing work you guys are doing. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for watching today's programme. There is no doubt that Israel during the month of May 2021 faced unprecedented violence and terrorism directed at their cities by Hamas's rockets and missiles, and the urgent need for Christians to stand up. And what a better way to show love and appreciation for the work of MDA is by supporting this organisation that saves lives in Israel. So thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.